The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittington. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
Dude, thanks for joining us. Eric Murray, it's a real pleasure, an honour actually. I'm a little bit flustered when I thought about talking to someone who's, done all the things that I'm currently watching on Sky TV other people doing. It's pretty choice, so thanks for making some time to come and have a chat with little old us about life, the universe, the Olympics, and anything else that should come with this chat.
Yeah, no sweat. Love it. I love a good podcast. It's so good.
Yeah, man. Hey, what are you watching at the moment? I mean, obviously you'll obviously keep an eye on the rowing. That's obviously without question. That would be something. But what else are you watching at the Olympics? Is there stuff you're keeping an eye out on?
Everything. Oh, I love track and field. I love watching the track and field, and they do such a great job on the TV because they just manage to time everything. You've got long jump, then a bit of high jump, you've got some running in there, and then you got another jumping, and it just goes from one to another to another to another. So I have to say the producers and stuff that manage to put everything on the TV is so good. It's great, and you get all that coverage, and they seem to squeeze it all into that sort of 3-hour time bracket, so that whole session is just done, and it's like, man, there's so much going on. But switching on, watching some of the gymnastics or even some of the other teams events, it's really good to see the highlights package where you can get to see a bit of everything. But I don't think there's anything at the games that I've missed, to be honest. You see a little bit of everything, and yeah, it's great fun watching.
I was thinking about Usain Bolt. Obviously, as everyone, it's funny. I was talking to someone about John Alomu the other day, and I'm like, every 4 years at Rugby World Cup, he becomes a headline again. And I suspect people who have performed so well at the Olympics, it's a similar thing. So a Usain Bolt conversation would be common at this stage. And I was watching the women's 100 meters, where Jamaica got 1, 2, and 3, and I didn't see the men's live, but I saw it on replay today. And the setup they've got, I don't know if you saw it or not, but the setup with the how they're lighting up that 100-meter track, there's a part of me which just goes, and I agree with what they've done for COVID. It's safety first, but if that had a full stadium with that light show, it would have been unreal.
Off the chain, man, that would have been cool. They have done a really fantastic job with the TV coverage, I have to say, and even the gymnastics and even in the high jumping, they've got the 360 cameras where they're taking the shots. And so, of course, someone's jumping and they're like, oh, let's go to the other side. And it goes, oh, and so you see the whole motion of it. That's cool. I got to say, they've done a fantastic job.
Did you see the men's high jump? For people who didn't see it, the two competitors who are friends, different countries, ended up deciding to share the gold medal rather than compete in a playoff.
Yeah, Italy and Qatar. Yeah, well, I think, it would have been, I've got to say, it's cool how there's different parts of sport like that where there's not a lot of sports where you can actually go, hey, look, it's tied. It's like in golf, it's like you can't get to the finish of a major and go, you know what? Oh, we're both on the same score. Sweet, bro. You want to share the cup? We'll share half the green jacket from the Masters. But in some events, there is a rule where you're like, you know what? We can. And I guess if you were against someone else and you really did want to put the boot into them, but at the same time, you're like, well, what if the risk is that you lose at the same time? So not very often do you get a sport where you can actually both walk away victorious and go, you know what, Chair, we both got a gold medal. I'll take it. And honestly, that's the thing with the Olympics, man. If you have that opportunity to get a medal, it goes down the chain a little bit. If you can win that gold, it's epic. But if you're there and you know that you're not quite up to the level, that you do want to walk away with the medal. So if somebody was to hand you a bronze medal and say, hey, look, you can have this bronze medal, 9 times out of 10, you'd have people that say, give it to me right now, and that's the way it rolls.
It does also seem that, and I'm sure this happens in sports all the time, but because the Olympics is so high profile on televisions all over the world every 4 years, that sportsmanship is highlighted as well. I'm sure that happens in every meet, but the runner, the 1500 meter runner who falls over and someone actually helps him get the rest of the race, almost giving up their race. It seems to be something, maybe you can tell me, it feels to me like that's a Special Olympic thing. Is it a Special Olympic thing, or do we just not see it in the other events because they're not televised the same?
I think you probably don't see them because they're not on the big stage. How many times would you watch track and field in a year? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those situations where at the moment it's right in the limelight. This is the biggest platform for sports, out of anything in the world. That's why the IOC is worth so much money, and the investment that gets put into it. Hence why the games have been run in this COVID era. It's because the platform for it is massive. So of course, when you see, like there was the 800 meter runners, the two favorites got taken out in the race, and it's like, wow, okay. We saw it with Nikki Hamlin at the last games, her and the lady that she tripped over with in that 5,000, emotional, heartbreaking. It's like, you're out. But of course you can lift that spirit. It's like, well, there's no point in getting angry because nothing's going to change. And you don't get to see that with too many of the sports. In other sports, if something happens, like honestly in rowing, if someone fell out, I ain't going to stop and turn around and go back and get him. I'll be like, hey, there's probably going to be someone there to pick you up. But obviously in different sports, there is that the ability to have that really close, cool sportsmanship that we love. That humbleness that we love to see.
Yeah. I guess especially you guys, when you were rowing, you were so far ahead. If someone did fall out, it would have to be one of the guys behind to pick them up anyway. So I think you get a green card for that. I've been having this conversation, and it is really for me an open conversation rather than an opinion, because I've flipped 180 on it, because I've been watching things like the sevens and the tennis and the golf, and I love watching the basketball, and I've been thinking, should these be at the Olympics? And I was of the opinion in the first sort of few days, I came to this conclusion that if this is not your sport's pinnacle, you shouldn't be there. In other words, the pinnacle for basketball would be the NBA finals. The pinnacle for rugby would be the Rugby World Cup. The pinnacle for tennis would be the majors or Wimbledon. But in saying that, watching how important it was, for example, and how emotional it was, for example, for those 7 girls to win, and and some of the other sports that I've mentioned, I think I've kind of checked myself, and I disagree with that now. But it does seem that there are more and more sports being added. I heard someone say ballroom dancing could be coming up. I'm not sure whether that's true or not. What do you think about the sports that are in there versus... when perhaps they're not the pinnacle for that sport, but they are still the gold medal?
You've got to rewind and go back to what the Olympics are about, okay? And yeah, it's about purity and everything, but at the end of the day, it's about countries versus countries, okay? It's not quite individual, and that's what it changes. Where in the NBA, you've got individuals, you've got the LeBrons and all the people that are at the top of their game. But at the end of the day, it's only the best people from your country. So you take golf, for example, before the Olympics, you've got Rory McIlroy coming out saying, we need to be doing this for our sport because it's our sport. And then, of course, then he's there in a playoff for the bronze medal, and he's wearing the Irish colours and he's wanting to win. And it changes. It completely changes them, and it's no different with the tennis. Is normally it's just the tennis player, it's not their country, and all of a sudden they're there hoping their country wins, and even you'll still have people, back when Federer and everyone were competing, everyone's like, oh, we love Roger Federer because he's such a nice guy, but at the end of the day, like the Swiss wanted him to win so badly, and with Djokovic, everyone wants him to win because it means a medal for the country. And that's what the Olympics really aligns to. So even though you do have these professionals that are earning millions of dollars in contracts and prize money around the world, the other thing with the Olympics as well that has, I think, come into the fold through different reasons for those sports is the fact that if you're trying to do something in your sport that nobody else has ever done before, it's a once every 4 years. Like you don't have the opportunity. So you can have these golfers that will win Grand Slams, or tennis Grand Slams, might never win the Olympics. And then one day you're going to get the person that wins the Olympics and they'll go, and they'll be like, oh, it doesn't matter, I've won Wimbledon. And they'll go, yeah. But have you ever won the Olympics? There's just different bits and pieces like that. And of course it is, as I say, the platform to showcase your sport, to get kids to go, wow, I could compete at the Olympics for New Zealand. They might never get to do any of those Grand Slams in tennis, or they might be close, but you could still be 300-400th in the world and be the best tennis player in New Zealand and get to go. So there's that side of the equation at the same time. So it definitely is. The Olympics are about countries competing against countries. Even though we're all individuals in a lot of different sports, it's still New Zealand wins this, New Zealand wins that, or Australia, whatever. And that's the situation with the Olympics.
Yeah, that's really interesting because as you say that, I think about, for example, Val Adams, and when she's competing, say, at a Diamond League event, obviously still from New Zealand, but may not be representing New Zealand like at the Olympics. So that's a really interesting way to describe it. And it's clearer. It does make me also think about the team sports, for example, the sevens that are always representing New Zealand and always have that silver fern on. But no, I think what I got a little lesson on myself was, watching the girls in particular, but also you're talking about tennis, the guys who got the bronze. As you say, they may be the 300th players in the world or whatever, but they're still able to compete and get a bronze for their country. Has got me to kind of check myself and take a step back and say, don't be so arrogant. This is the pinnacle for many of them. Like you say, there's a Wimbledon every year, but there's only one gold medal once every 4 years. And because like in rowing, do they have world champs every year?
We have them every year except the Olympic year.
Yeah, so you could be the world champion 3 years in a row, but you only get one chance every 4 years to be the Olympic champion.
Yeah, and even athletics, they have a world championships every second year. So, they had theirs in 2019 and then ultimately in 2020. So every sport's completely different when they have their pinnacle event. And obviously there are a lot of events where the Olympics is as high as you can get to. But at the end of the day, you've just still got to be able to go out there on the big dance and do it. And that's what makes the Olympics such a crazy spectacle, because we've seen it in so many different things where the favorites are not necessarily the ones coming out on top. And that's what I love about the Olympic Games, is that even though you're trying to prepare for them and trying to do for it, you can miss right at the final hurdle, something goes wrong, and it's like shit, and we've probably got the best example in New Zealand currently, who's currently sitting in a hotel room in MIQ, but with Emma Twigg, 4 Olympic Games. First one 7th and then 2 4ths. And you're like, man, why didn't you quit? Well, she sort of did, but she didn't. She's like, no, I'll come back for this. And boom, gold medal. So it's taken her a long time to get to that point, to be able to win that Olympic gold medal. And it's just perseverance. And, she would trade all of the medals and the world championship title that she's won for that Olympic medal.
Is that right?
And that's what happens. And and same, if Hamish and I had won everything all the way through, but never quite got there at the Olympics, I'd be like, take my medals, just give me that Olympic medal. Because it's so hard to be there, to turn it on for one race or one regatta every 4 years, and that's what happens, is you just get someone that's just absolutely worked their tits off to get to this point. And it's like, holy moly, and they can pull big cats out of very small bags, and that's what happens at the Olympics in terms of racing.
I've got a question for you that's prompted by the Emma Twigg situation, but I'm sure you were sort of expecting this. I'm going to play a little bit of footage of you watching Emma Twigg. For people who are watching, they can see this.
She's got it. Yeah. She's got it. She'll literally. Oh. Go Emma! Go Emma! She's got it.
I'm going to shed a tear while I watch it.
Oh, it's so good.
It is emotional for everyone to watch. It's emotional for me to watch. But a couple of things. I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, because Emma's been at it for so long, fourth gold, that's part of the emotion. You didn't seem to have the same emotion for the eights. That one, it was. But so what was it in particular about the Emma Twigg moment that caused that emotion in you?
Because I've been there when you see the heartbreak of her when she's got 4th, and it's just like, wow, and you see the dejection, and you just see the emotion firsthand of holy cow, you've worked so hard for this and you got 4th, you've missed out. Because rowing's rowing's quite, it's like any other one, just the opportunity to win that Olympic gold medal is once every 4 years, so when it doesn't go right, you literally come back and you go, okay, my next 4 years of my life, I am going to try and do it again, and that's you commit. There's I'm living in Cambridge, I'm going to row every day, there's no weekends, there's no public holidays, there's no whatever, can't do this, can't do that, and that's the opportunity cost that you give up for it. But of course, and then it happens again, it's like, wow, and you see it happen along the way, whether they don't quite achieve it at the world champs, and you go, right, there's another 12 months I've got to put behind me. So it's just part of your life. You're like, get it going through, and you're just watching the turmoil and the heartbreak, and it's like, holy heck, and we trained with Emma for so long, just part of the program, and being there all the time and seeing each other every day and racing against each other every day and training together and going overseas and doing everything. And of course, so it's one of your friends, that's just has been, I wouldn't, just hard luck, bad breaks, bits and pieces. And then all of a sudden it's them, it's their turn to shine, to be in the spotlight, to be like, wow, you've finally done it, Emma. And probably, I said it many times that she deserved that gold medal because of the work and everything that she's put in, and it's just been heartbreaking to watch. And so, this time it was like, let's make sure there's nothing going to go wrong. And it did, nothing went wrong. The conditions were good, and everything just went to plan. Boom, gold medal, celebrate. Wow, finally, and it's just so much of your life that you've put on the line to do this. And people will go, well, why the hell did you spend so much time doing it? And you go, well, when we set goals and when you set, you want to do something, you just go through it, and I know it's probably not the best example, but you talk to people that are trying to have children, and it takes them years upon years upon years.
Right.
And then, of course, they finally get pregnant or something. And it's like, wow, and the emotions you overcome with that. So very, very weird example, but the same thing. It's just like it's taken so long for something to happen, and for someone that's such a lovely person that deserves every bit of ounce of what she's getting. She's just been a trailblazer in the sport, single sculls, an openly gay woman, married, and she's just like, no barriers are down, just going for it. And you're like, you're amazing, and that's the thing, is how can an amazing person be so unlucky? But then finally it's come right. And that's where the emotion comes from, is because like, I know the backstory between it all. And of course it's just like, wow, so good. So good.
And what, 34, I think she is. Do you think she's got another one in her? I mean, obviously she can chill, and she can be stoked about this one first. But I mean, for a rower, how does 38 sound? Is that still doable?
Yeah, 38 is doable, but I have to say it's there's not too many decisions you make. People make decisions in the heat of the moment, and they say things they don't want to. We've all been there, right?
Yep.
Had an argument with your missus.
Yeah.
And of course it is. It's the same thing. As it's like, you don't want to say you're going to quit because you don't know. She could, all of that work could be behind her, or else she could be like, thank God I can finally just put that boat on the shelf and never come back to it. But you just don't know the emotions until you've taken time to sit down and compress. And that's the one thing as well. In a way, she is only 3 years out from the next games.
Yeah.
So maybe she's like,
37.
wow, shit. Could I do that for another 3 years? What does that look like in terms of my life? Or, what is her and her wife wanting to do things, or move somewhere, or, get into business life or whatever. So there's just different bits and pieces that you've got to decide over time. So I guess that's the case for everybody that's in the team, young and old. I'm hoping that a lot of our team just keeps the ground underneath them and just keeps the ground running, hits ground running, just goes for it. Because, we've got some amazing results with the men and women and the eights and the double and the pair and a few crews that just missed out. So I'm just hoping we don't see a big exodus, because of, the last 2 years have taken their toll on a few people, just with the whole COVID situation and everything else. And it'll just be deciding on where to from here. And in a way, it's a really interesting situation. And for myself, that it happens very, very quickly. Like you win the gold medal one day, and the next day people are asking you questions like, what are you going to do from here? And so in your back of your mind, you've sort of got to have already made up a bit of a plan on where you're going to go and what you're going to do. But at the same time, you can't really make concrete decisions, because you sort of just got to have the feelers out, and you've got to like take a little bit of time, and you want to just let everything sink in, because if the pressure and the situation was way too hard for you, you're like, maybe I just do need to take that time. And because going back to the Olympics, in my experience as well, as a champion, it's a really hard place to live,
right?
Because there's either meeting expectation or there's not meeting expectation. There's no like, oh wow, like men's eight, like they exceeded by miles, but now when we go to the next Olympics, there's really only a couple of crews that can exceed expectation, like the women's eight, because they didn't quite win. They got a silver medal, and the double, and we've got a few other crews like below that. So Whereas everyone else, they'll go to the next Olympics and everyone will be like, oh, so if they don't win the Olympics this time, they haven't gone as well, you know? And so that's another thing that you've got to put into the equation when you're working forward, is it's like people are going to expect you to win from now on, you know? And so that success highlights another fact upon mental health and bits and pieces, where from this day forward, like people are going to be like, oh, you got second, or that's disappointing. And you'll be like, shit, any other day, any other year, I would have been stoked to have had a medal, but now you're in a whole completely different environment. So that becomes part of that decision making going forward, of whether you continue, and you know, if you do, you have to deal with that. And if not, you know, like you can hang the oars up, be proud of what you've been able to achieve, walk away with your medal, and, you know, celebrate that part of your life and career and move on to something else.
You talked about people, you made an analogy about having kids, but then you talked about people asking you the day after your gold medal, what are you doing next time? That also is a bit like kids. I mean, sure, those of us who have had children have all experienced, you have your first, and then within days,
when's the second?
Yeah, you're going again? Are you going again? So it's not that I can understand the athletic part of it, but that sort of resonates. I also wanted to ask you, you talked about emotion, and we talked about the emotion you showed for Emma, and showed that little video. I want to show some more video here. I think this is 2012 for you. It's very quick, because this looks to be the happiest person in the world. I could not imagine a person being happy. It's only about 5 seconds, being happier than this. I was wondering if you could describe this sort of feeling. Look at this. I honestly, you in the back there, I can't imagine a person looking happier or more excited or whatever than this moment right here. What goes through your head?
Same thing, you know, and this is what gets lost because of what we were able to achieve in the later part of our career, right? So that was the culmination of going to the Athens Olympics and getting 4th, Beijing Olympics getting 7th, and then finally we win. Okay, so there's 8 years, or longer than that, 10 plus years of work going into that moment there where I can celebrate. Okay, and that's it. That's what it comes down to. So that's why celebrations are so emotional and so dramatic generally, because it's taken you just start to realize like what's gone into it, the time, the effort, the people around you, the opportunity costs, all the bits and pieces. And it's just like, wow, you know, and we looked at it with the sevens players, you know, they kick the ball out and then it's just like, wow, we've done it, you know, and that you can finally, you hear that whistle go, it's it, you're the champion. And so of course they go, you know, disappointing when they got silver in Rio, and they've worked hard for 5 years to get to that point, and now they can finally say they've got it. But this is what the Olympics is about, you know, that one moment of the pinnacle every 4 years. I don't know why we do it to ourselves, honestly. You know, we get into sport and these Olympic sports and we do it to ourselves, and it's just crazy how you know, and that whole mental side of things is just ridiculous. You know, when I look back on it, I'm just like, why did I put myself through that? You know, why did I go to one and then go, yeah, you know what? 1,200 and something days or whatever, 1,300 days. Yeah, no, let's do it again. You know, it's just like, oh my God. And that's where the celebration comes from, because you know you've done it. You know, it's what you've been driven to do for so long, and you know, to celebrate it. And at the same time, we're the statistics, but then there's all the other people that are statistics that don't make it. You know, people in the teams that never quite get there, that don't quite get across that line, that don't even get medals, that spend 15, 20 years of their lives getting to that point. You know, and that's the brutality of sport, which we don't really, you need to think about, but at the same time, you don't want to think about it as well, because there's so many people that were so close yet so far, you know, and that's the crazy part.
You talked about the sevens there, and the whistle blows, and then they know they've done it. Does that feel the same in rowing? Because I watched 2012 and 2016 races while I was, you know, waiting to hear from you, and you know, you won by a boat length and a half sort of thing. So in that last 250 meters, when those boys turn red, is there a point where you go, before the line, we've got it, or as you yourself, do you genuinely wait until the line before you release?
There's a really funny close-up in Bondi. We used to use it in some of our speeches, and there's a slow-mo of us looking down the boat sort of on an angle, and I look, because I keep track of where we are, and I look out and we've got like 2 strokes to go, and you can just see me mouth like, we've got it, like this, and we're not even across the line. And then like Bondi always uses it and goes, he called it before, and he goes, we could have been one of those memes on the internet where someone celebrates before they hit the line. But of course I knew that we were going to drift over the line anyway, but it was sort of one of those things. But when you're in the middle of the race, like, see, Emma would have known, I reckon with about 600 meters to go, possibly maybe even sooner, that the race was hers.
Wow.
And it was hers to lose. So you go through this emotion where you go, this is ours to lose. Okay, like we've got it right now. If this stays as it is in 2 minutes time, we're winning, but there's still 2 minutes. And so that's yours to lose. And so generally in a lot of our races with what we did, and Emma she pretty much did the same, but she did it way better than we did, is that you just create a gap that's unobtainable, that people can't make up. And so we were always doing that. And then you don't have to go into the real desperation part where you've got to sprint to the line, because in a lot of the semi-finals, like in the rowing, the weather was a bit rough and people were sprinting to the line, people catching water, bad strokes, and they were missing out on finals, or they were missing out on medals. So you don't want to have to be in a situation where it's really desperate, like running, where you've got to really surge to the line or whatever, or even with the sevens and stuff like that, it gets real desperate in that last minute with Fiji, where they're equal, and it's like, we have to score. If they get the ball and they score, they've won. So there's that desperation moment to it. So if you can avoid that desperation, it just makes it a little bit easier on you. So when you do cross that finish line, and when you do hear that buzzer, which means completion, whether it's the whistle, the buzzer, the hooter, whatever, you can finally just have this. There's a very short period, and it's very quick. It's like, yes, thank God we didn't screw that up. And then it's just, yes, we've done it. But just in your head, as soon as you hear that buzzer, that's the first emotion, is like relief, and then you can celebrate. So I'm pretty sure it happens across the board, and you can just be like, yeah, we've done it. And then you can finally like let go of the emotions and then get that understanding of what it's taken to get to that point.
Yeah, wow. With that, it's a strange word to use, but with that release in 2012 and the video that we just showed, does that mean that you hold 2012 sort of closer to your heart than 2016, or do both of your golden children have sort of equal placings?
No, London definitely holds more luster than the Rio, because they're done in completely different ways. One is trying to win, and the other's continuing to win. I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it, because, the motivation to get to win an Olympic gold medal is just unreal, trying to get to that point. But as I said before, expectation, it's like, well, you won last time. You're just going to try and win it again. So you're just sort of trying to maintain what you've already created and make sure you stay in front, rather than having to try and do all the work to get to that point, because you know what it's taken to get to that level. And so then you've just got to keep working around that level again to get to that point. And that's probably it's a really weird thing we talk about sometimes. But to describe it as well is hard, but you've got to learn how to win. Okay. So you've got to learn what's the makeup of winning in terms of the strength, the fitness, the training, the technique, the boat setup, the mental aspect. You've got to get all of that together in a really good way, and if you take Emma, for example, she never managed to marry all of those pieces together, hence why she was getting fourth. And so whatever she did going forward, she made a couple of changes, married everything together, boom, you win. And so, of course, once you've learned how to win, the makeup roughly of what you were doing, training time, intensities, boat setup, bits and pieces, and you've got all your benchmarks to work from. So if your times are a little bit slow, you're like, well, we're going slower than we were when we won, but if your times are pretty much the same, you're like, look, we're in pretty good shape. And so you're able to use that sort of things. It's no different with a runner, and they'll go, well, you've got to do 20 seconds to run a 200. And if you're running 21 and you can't break it, you're like, well, do you think you're going to win? Probably not, So it's just the ability to be able to benchmark off what you've done before, which allows you to then go forward and try and do it again. So once we learned how to win, which was, even in some of our world championship years, then it was just the ability to keep tinkering with that slightly here and there to make sure we continued it going. And that's what we were able to do for like 8 years, which is pretty ridiculous.
Do you know your stats? Right. Do you actually know what your stats are? Because it was 100 and I don't know the number, but I feel like it was like 130 or 230 or some races that you didn't lose.
71 and 0.
71. Yeah. Okay, I was giving you more credit, but that's because I'm a
8 years.
Kiwi.
8 years. Oh, it is ridiculous though, because like and what I mean like is we never lost any race, like preliminary race, semi-final race, final race, out of any regatta that we went to in the whole time. And like before we managed to achieve that in rowing, the number was from like a 4 from Great Britain, and I think they had like 28 in a row, but it was with different crews, different people, and like even now there is nobody in the world that has got probably 5 or 6 under their belt, and it's like, so I just don't know if it'll ever get repeated, which is pretty cool, but at the same time I'd love for it to, you know. We were just dominant, and we just tried to stay dominant for so long, and it was an interesting scenario because, as I was saying before about that celebrating, you know, when we were at World Champs a couple of times and even World Cup racing, I remember crossing the finish line one time and we sort of just crossed the finish line. You know, we didn't like celebrate. And I thought about it afterwards, and I said to Hamish, I said, man, we need to celebrate, because at World Cup level, you know, you've got people just trying to win medals, you know, and people getting second and third and like completely celebrating, going, wow, you know, like, and you're like, are we missing something here? So we really had to think about the why, and why are we doing this? And looking in ourselves to say, you know, we need to celebrate everything as we go along, even the trainings that go really well, celebrate it, say, that's it, cool, just to make sure that we're keeping it fun rather than it becoming a chore, because the moment it becomes a chore, then you're not doing it for the right reasons. And, you know, you find that with a lot of different athletes, or even in sport and in business, you know, in life, if you're not enjoying your job, don't do it, you know, make a change, move on. You know, and we were enjoying our job, but it wasn't like we were like, it was getting you up every day going, I'm so excited about going down to the lake. So you had to really find things within yourself to make sure you were doing it properly, rather than just going, you know what, I ticked the box today, I turned up at work and I did my job, you know. And it's a really, really interesting scenario that we had to like search in ourselves to make sure we were doing well.
In those 71 wins, and I'm not talking about finals for medals and that kind of stuff, because obviously, you know, you leave it all on I was going to say the track, but the equivalent, leave it all on the water.
Yep.
Because you see sprinters and stuff, they know that they just got to come first or second, and then the fastest third also qualifies. They often ease up, and whether they finish first or second, it's not such a big deal. But did you guys, because that gets them through, did you guys have a decision that you wanted to dominate and win, or did it just happen? And I'm reminded of Arnold Schwarzenegger, how they talk about bodybuilders peaking for a competition and then coming off and peaking for a competition, which I'm sure is like most athletes. And he says his domination through, I guess it's the 70s, was that he peaked for a competition and he just stayed up there. And he never had to come down. And he talks about never coming down and always staying up at that, you know, competition ready. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And what about that? Oh, look, we can ease off, and if they win this quarterfinal, it doesn't matter because we're through.
Okay. Two sides to that story. One is generally the New Zealand rowing program keeps us very high. So we are within sort of that 1% of speed all the time. So New Zealand rowing and generally went overseas to like the Lucerne, and we'd quite often dominate at top of the medal table, everything, right? And we'd get maybe 4 or 5 golds and you know, a few other medals, but then we never really transferred that into the World Championship 7 or 8 weeks later. So we were at the top, but we didn't quite have an ability to really push on and get to that level. Now, on the other side of your question as well, was that in our first few years, yes, Hamish and I were going out in races, and we were just doing enough to qualify. So you've got to go through a heat and then a semi-final and a final. If there's larger numbers than 20, 24 or 26 countries or whatever, then you'd have to do a quarterfinal in the middle. So what we were doing was that we would just get out in front, okay, cool, take the pressure down a bit and just roll it along and make sure you qualified in 1, 2 or 3. And in our case, we were trying to win it all the time. But what we started finding, and we nearly got caught out, was Karapiro World Champs here in 2010. We were racing against these great British guys we had an amazing rivalry with. And in the race, our race plan was like, let's see what the British do today. You know, like so stupid. But that was the way that it was, like just what we did. It was like, we'll get out, we'll see where they are. Oh, okay, there they are. Oh, there they are at the halfway. shit, they're in front of us with 500 meters to go. And we were worried about them rather than just doing our own work, going really hard.
Right.
So then when we nearly lost that, and we dipped into the desperation bag that day, we made a conscious decision that we were just really going to push ourselves every time, you know. And I wouldn't say we went 100% every time, but we were like, let's get out into a race and we'll just test ourselves all the way down. You know, if we get out in front, we won't drop the rating, we won't drop, you know, and drop the pressure, but we'll try and make it really efficient and just tap it along. So what started happening was we were winning these heat races by like 15 seconds. You know, we won one in Germany by like 19 seconds. And everyone was just like, why the hell are you guys, why didn't you back off? And we're like, why should we? You know? So all of a sudden, all our races we were going balls to the wall and just going as fast as we can, because we started thinking to ourselves, look, if we go overseas to the World Cup and then the World Champs, we only get 6 races a year that we actually get to race against the same competition. So why not make every single race as good as we can to learn something from it? Because we don't go and do all 3 World Cups, otherwise we're away overseas for like nearly 4 months. So we were like, sometimes we do 2, or sometimes we just do the 1. So you're either getting 9 or 6 races a year, and it's like, make the most of them. And that's really what we started to do. And we found that by doing that, we just were learning so much about ourselves, trying to be efficient, putting people under pressure. And it just made us so much better than everybody else, because we weren't just trying to do enough to get through. We were really trying to up the game. But it did also up the game of our whole event at the same time. So everybody else was like, shit, if we want to keep with Eric and Hamish, we're really just going to have to go for it as well. And so then all of a sudden, the fields in our competition started getting quite a lot more competitive.
Right.
So, you know, it was just the way it rolled.
So you guys are sort of, I'm saying this, you may not say this, but it sounds like that you guys are sort of responsible for the increase in quality of rowing. I mean, like they always say, you know, rugby around the world increases as the All Blacks, you know, get better and play other things. It sounds like you're saying something similar, that you always went hell for leather. You pushed as hard as you could, and that challenged the other guys to pick up where they're at as well.
Yeah, I think everybody does that. There's a lot of crews that do that around the world, because there are some standout crews that just, they are on fire all year. You know, they've changed something and they go well, and they just get better and they get better and they get better. And of course, that's what you're really wanting. But as a program like here in New Zealand, the quality's been around for the better part of sort of a decade and a half, nearly 2 decades. And that's why our program's been so successful. You know, we've won a gold medal in every Olympics since 2000, you know, like multiple on few occasions, because we just have these people that are producing, and we watch them training. You know, we see Rob, and then we saw the Eva Swindells, and then there's Mahe and ourselves, and it rolls into the girls. And so all of a sudden it's just like, you know what it takes to be at that level. So the whole program lists, the whole training environment lists, the intensity lists, and that's what happens. And definitely around the world, we see in a lot of events that the competition just getting faster and closer, you know, and as we saw at the games, there was, I don't know, 7 or 8 world records set, you know, so people don't set world records unless you're going really fast. And that's really what you want to see as a sport. You want to see the progressions keep increasing all the time. Otherwise, if you've got a world record that's been sitting there from like, you know, early 2000s, you're sort of like, well, why were they going that fast back then? You know, have we just not been working hard enough? Because you can't really say the technology or the training and stuff like that from back in the late 90s, early 2000s is the same as it is now. So those are just this, well, you know, there's a whole lot of drug stuff in there, but I'll take the benefit of the doubt that those people weren't on them. But you know, but that is the situation, and you just got to keep progressing and keep trying to push it higher and faster, and push the benchmarks as far as you can, and that's what you have to do if you want to be successful.
Speaking of world records, and you mentioned your 71 wins, John Walker once said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he held his medals as more valuable than his world records. And his rationale was, eventually someone will take my world record away, but they'll never take my medal. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. And with most sports, like outdoor sports, I'll say, like probably not indoor sports, that type of thing. But when you talk about distances and world records and stuff like that, you need it to be hot. You need it to be in the heat of the moment, you know, like fast, really competitive. Rowing, you need a strong tailwind with warm water. You know, all of these different bits and pieces need to align for you to go that fast. And so that's the situation with a lot of records. You know, you're not going to see a 100-meter men's record run into a headwind. You know, you're going to see them with a slight tailwind. Now they put a benchmark on it. Obviously, if it's over like 2 meters a second or something, then or a meter a second, it doesn't count. But those are the situations. So to break records, there's just so much involved in doing that. And of course, as you say, like, you know, you get a really hot piece of water, and then all of a sudden, or like Tokyo, all of a sudden you've got 8 world records that have been set. And that's like, wow, you know, that generally doesn't happen, that you get so many happen in one go. So yeah, like, you know, those records might stand for a long time, because we might spend the next 10 years with never finding those exact same conditions ever again. But of course, you've got your Olympic champions, you've got your medal winners, and they're always going to be the ones that won the medals or won, you know, that are the champions.
Where are your medals right now? I'm a bit surprised they're not around your neck. I thought you'd wear them during the Olympics 24/7.
They're on a shelf. They're on a shelf in my hallway, actually. Yeah. Oh, you know, the one thing that I've always, and Hamish and I don't know, we were always just like, share the medals, take them to events, give them to people here, wear the medal. People will be like, no, I didn't earn it. You go, who gives a shit? Just put it on, take a photo, you know, like, man. So, you know, as part of what we did, like the medal's this tangible reward that you get from it. But even me, I'm sitting here going, I'd love to touch one of those medals because they look cool, you know,
yeah.
See how big they are. And that's what the public is like. You know, they support us, they do it, you know, they're the ones sitting there cheering for us. Because if you didn't have the public supporting us, no one would know who you are. No one would really give a shit about the Olympics. You know, there's all of these different bits and pieces. So we aspire to it. And we are, as you say, with John Walker, like, we're the Olympic champions. So if you lost your medals, okay, that would suck, but you're still going to be an Olympic champion.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things with it, is that I love sharing what the spirit of the Olympics is like, and sharing those medals and seeing people's reactions going, oh, this is an Olympic medal. Wow. And take a photo. You know, and because they'll actually remember that forever, because they've held that Olympic medal. So you can touch so many more people's lives intimately because of that than you can by just being a picture slapped up on the TV. So, you know, we love sharing that occasion, and it's awesome to do.
It's so true, though. I remember probably as a 10-year-old, I don't know how it ended up in our house. My dad was the president of the Auckland Rugby Referees Association, so it's obviously somehow, but we had the Ranfurly Shield in our house. And I can still remember holding the Ranfurly Shield in my house, and I can remember the photo of me sitting on the couch. I can actually remember the couch. It's such a strong memory, and me holding the Ranfurly Shield. Ian Ferguson and Paul McDonald, who won all those medals in kayaking in the 80s. I think Paul McDonald, one of them was an old boy of our school. And he came along and obviously brought the medals with him and did the speech to the school, etc., etc. And he tells a story about he used to share his medal around. But he said eventually, apparently one day, someone who got the medal and put it over his neck, put it in their mouth and bit on it to see if it was real gold, and left a tooth mark in it. And he said, so from that day on, he wasn't sharing his medal anymore. I thought, fair enough too.
I always, because people want to do the old story where, you know, take the photo where you put it in your mouth. And I go, look, anyone wanting to do that, just remember how many people have touched this medal, you know, like, just putting it out there for you, you know, it's like, so.
Hey, we showed that video earlier of you with watching Emma Twigg. I don't want to use the word harder because it's stupid, because people will go, well, does that mean physically harder or mentally harder? So I'll use the word difference. What's the difference with what's going on with you watching these things happening versus competing? Now, some people say, I've heard ex-athletes say things like, oh, it's harder to watch than compete because when I'm competing, I can make a difference. I think harder is a bit of a loaded term, because then you go, what does that mean? But what does it feel like watching with no control from thousands of kilometers away versus competing in a boat?
It's a really good one, actually, because most people just ask, you know, what's it like being here and not competing? But actually being there, when you are there and you have been competing and you have been supporting, it's quite different, because you've got your emotions as well as theirs. Okay, so you're either got your race to come, or you've just had your race, you know. So we had always competed before Emma had, so we're on a really big high. So when she doesn't win, you're like, man, that sucks.
Oh yeah.
But I've got other stuff to do, you know. And so you sort of lose a little bit of that sense until you have time to think about it. But obviously being here, You've just got so much time to see it and to think about it, because you're not there competing. You're not having that other side stuff at the same time. So you really get to be excited about what's happening and what's coming up. Whereas we'd just be excited about our race. Who cared that Mahi was racing straight after us, or that the men's double was going to be on in the afternoon, or whatever, or so-and-so's tomorrow? You're like, don't care. It's not even on your radar. Whereas now that you're here, you're like, sweet, we've got Emma first, then we've got the women's 8, then we've got the men's 8. There's just so much happening that it's coming one after the other. So you'll have a whole lot of different bits and pieces where you're just waiting for stuff to happen. So you're excited about what's happening and what's coming up, and just to see how the team's going to go. Because the other side of it is that generally when I'm there, how everybody's going. You see the training pieces. You see, because we're like 3 days out, we'd always do like a 1,000 meter or maybe a 1250 or something like that, and we'd get all our times, and they'd be turned to a percentage of the world record. So we were always like basically close to 100%. So you'd see people, and if you got one of your teammates that's sort of down 97, 98%, you're like, you guys are going to be quite off the pace here. So you sort of know how everybody's going into it. So that in the heats, you're like, you know what, I think they might get second or third. They should make the semis, or this person should make the final. So I still have a little bit of a connection with that because of some of the team members I talk with. But when you're there and you're in that moment, you're still just focused on what you're doing. So it was just really cool to be on the outside as just another general member of the public with a little bit of an insight into it, but just to be able to be there and see how they were going to go and just support it. And that's the thing with the 8, like, on paper, all day of the week, they were meant to be like third place, because they didn't win their heat. They did win the rep, which puts them to be like third place, basically. Yeah. So I'm thinking, oh man, this would be so cool if they could win a medal. And that's what everybody thought. I think that was why it was such a surprise, because Emma had been qualified the fastest. Everybody was like, fingers crossed, don't want the commentators curse. The women's 8's like, they should probably win today unless someone bolts away, which sort of happened, which was unfortunate. But then the men's 8 was just so extraordinarily different, where it was like, they're going to win, and it was just like, wow. And I think that's why the celebrations for that was so much better. And even for the boys in the 8, because they themselves would have had a belief that let's go, like their team talk no doubt would have been like, right, let's just go out there. This is our final race. Let's put it out there and see what we can do. And them themselves would have been like, we can have a very good race today. They wouldn't have been sitting on the start line going, we're going to win this today. Whereas see, Hamish and I, we sat there going, we're going to win this today. We do it properly, we'll win it easily. Because we knew, because we'd won everything on the way through. We were the fastest qualifiers, all on paper. It's just how it works. Yeah. And so, of course, but when they came out flying, it was like, holy moly, here they go. And they just are a statistic of putting your best performance on the day when it counts every 4 years. Boom. Olympic champion.
Was there any conversation around you being involved with the 8s as well? Did that conversation ever happen that, respectfully, because you're younger than me, but a bit older, maybe the peers is not the place, but no, the 8 sounds like it could be a go. Did you ever have that conversation with, New Zealand rowing, yourself, other people?
Yep. I actually was going to come back and row, and I started training. I had some knee surgery because I had a bit of meniscus that was pissing me off for a couple of years, but not to rowing extent, but I couldn't really run on it. And if I overextended it, it hurt. So I got that cleaned up. And then I was training right through until May 2017. And I was just going to take the year off, keep fit. But then my boy's autistic. So I was doing a lot of stuff with him at school and taking him and doing stuff with teachers and other bits and pieces. And it just got to a point where I was like, mate, he needs way more attention than me rowing. And so I called it a day. And then I did have a visit from Hamish after 2019 saying, look, would you come back and, would you consider it, just so that we can really get like some training ethic put into the team. And because he knew we had the potential, he knew we had the guys that were good enough to like make an 8 program go fast. And we had even spoken about it prior, after Rio, that he was going to go and jump on the bike. I was going to spend a year or two just like, training. And then we were going to come back together and try and get an 8 going fast for Tokyo. Yeah. And so that was our plan. And obviously I called day on the plan, and then Hamish went back, and then he just came back one final time and said, "Are you sure you don't want to come in?" And I thought about it for a week, and I asked a few questions, but I just couldn't do it with everything I had going on, and with my son, and all the time and effort that he needs. And it would have just been such a massive ask. And at the end of the day, do I regret it? Absolutely not. I loved watching what those boys have done. I think it's amazing. And at the same time, I was happy to walk away and be like, you know what, I've achieved everything I'd ever hoped for, if not more, in what I did in rowing. And so, now I just am going to absolutely celebrate what they managed to achieve, like the whole program, and it's just awesome to see.
You're working now with Autism New Zealand as their patron, or one of their patrons, obviously because of your son, Zach. How's it all going? How's Zach doing?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a process, put it that way. Autism's such a crazy thing of how people see the world differently, or how they behave differently, or their flexibility around certain situations, socialness, everything. So it's really just navigating through like what issues you have in that sort of sense, and making the best possible journey out of it so that you can learn how to be a functioning member of society in some way, shape or form. And that's really what it's about with me and my boy. Like he's nonverbal, so he doesn't want to talk, but has a huge way of communicating. But other than that, just loves doing lots of stuff, and enjoys going to school, and enjoys being at home, and loves knocking walls out with me while I'm renovating and playing around. So, there's just a whole different range of things, but obviously getting your head around it and then being able to work towards it so that he can have the best life possible. That's really where a lot of my situation and a lot of my time goes into these days, for sure.
It's funny how when you get impacted day-to-day life and how all of a sudden you're involved with something new. My mother passed away a few years ago of motor neuron disease, and nothing to do with motor neuron disease beforehand. All of a sudden you feel it impacting your life, and you want to help and be involved, and you feel a connection to the society. And I guess with Autism New Zealand, it's the same for you. It's this thing that you've now got a passion for, or at least are involved with, because of the personal impact that having a son with autism has put on your life.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just things that pop up on your radar, and nobody, like, I never thought that when you had that decision, like, okay, we'll have a kid, whether something happens in their development inside the womb, it's like, oh man, their leg didn't develop properly, or something happened, so whatever happens, you just deal with whatever, whether they've got like loss of hearing or something. There's just all different bits and pieces, and if that happens to you on a personal level, then of course the only thing you can do is get involved with it. And that was one thing that I was always like, no different with people with cancer. It's the reason why someone goes, you know what, I'm going to start a Give a Little page, and I'm going to go run a 100K ultra marathon, and I'm going to do it to support a cancer foundation because my mum or my dad or my sister or my brother or my auntie or uncle or my best mate has got cancer, and so you're like, if I can do my little piece to help out, then that's the way it's going to roll. And so for me, it's exactly the same. It's like, look, how can I help? And they're like, well, we need to do these events, and we want you to come along, and we need to talk to the government, and we want you to be involved and get some connections. And I'm like, cool, let's do it. How does this work? How do we help 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 people? And that's what you've got to like put some time into doing. And obviously, if it means a lot to you, I've always looked at it as I've been in a privileged position where with my rowing and what I was able to achieve meant that we were in the media. It's no different why you're speaking to me here now. And so all of a sudden it's like, cool, how can I use this to help in a special way, to do different things? And that's why I love doing charity events. Like people will be like, can you come and do this? It's like, yeah, cool. And I've just been signed up to do the old celebrity basketball slam again, and that's awesome. And that's for the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Cool.
And if you look at it, last year we raised $650K for Starship.
Wow.
So you're like, man, if I can be one piece of the puzzle to throw around a bit of basketball, have a bit of fun, and they can raise as much money to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, how many kids can you make wishes and stuff with it for that? And it's like, takes like almost zero of my time. I have fun, and at the same time we're helping a hell of a lot of people. So I really enjoy doing as much of that as I possibly can.
I'm reminded of I think it's an army saying, which is lead, follow, or get out the way. And I guess if you've got a child who's impacted by something, you can't get out the way and there's no one else to follow. So you basically got to lead, don't you? You don't have any other option.
Yeah, pretty much, and that's one of the things is a lot of these different things, there's support and there's different places, but at the same time, you've got to make the best decisions for yourself and your children or your parents or whoever is affected by it, whatever. And you just have to roll forward with it. You have to do the best job that you possibly can because things ain't going to change. And I think that's one thing is I'm quite a realistic person. I'm very optimistic. It's a tiny little bit of pessimism in me now after spending so much time with Hamish because that's what he was. But at the same time, you just got to be like, hey, like this is here. It's going to be here to stay. Move forward, deal with it, and do what you have to make it the best possible situation that you can.
I'm interested if you've got any stories or any memories of the Olympics when you were there that aren't necessarily rowing related. I was thinking the other day that, the competition is the most important thing, but it seems one of the things that we've lost from this Olympics is that sort of Olympic village spirit, seeing the athletes at other events, seeing the rowers at the sevens or seeing the shot putters at the basketball. And that's not able to be done this year, and that's fine for a one-off. But as someone who was there competing, successful, top of your game, compete, and then you've got time in the village, did you see any other athletes? Did you see a Usain Bolt final? Was there anything else that you attended that wasn't rowing specific that is a real highlight?
Everything. We are lucky because rowing's finished in that first week, so we can just go do whatever. And normally you have to apply to get tickets. Like there's a certain amount of like athletes tickets and stuff, but you would just roll in as if we were meant to be there, backpack on, New Zealand shirt on, accreditation, just roll in through the athletes entrance. And of course, once you're wearing like your accreditation and you've got a backpack on and you look like you're meant to be there, they don't check it. They'll just roll through and you're heading off to the toilets or the changing room. So you're just like, go that way, this way. And so, of course, that's what we just tried to do as much of as possible and just go share that experience and then find a seat in the stand and just have a laugh. But yeah, we try and get to as much as we can. And what it does is that Olympic experience makes the time worthwhile. So after my first one in Athens, I was like, man, I can't wait to go back to that. So when the times get tough during the training period, you're like, you know what, that's fine. I can't wait to be back at the Olympics doing it, and so all of those bits and pieces. And yeah, you get to see some amazing things happen, pieces of history, sporting history. We were there, we actually managed to get into the stadium when Usain Bolt in Beijing when he broke the 200-meter record, and it was just like, holy hell, that place was on fire. And it was just like this, it was just incredible, the atmosphere, and like you always remember it. And then there's just fun things, like the New Zealand team environment, the culture that's created around team supporting the team and celebrating the success and just even celebrating the competition and people competing and representing New Zealand is another level. There's celebrations all the time and everybody greeting teams back into the like our sort of little bubble, the New Zealand sort of house that we create as part of it. So everybody feels like they're at home, and then there's just cool things like trying to do a 50 chicken nugget challenge in the food hall, just bits and pieces for a laugh.
That's awesome. Now, you've already talked about your charity work and stuff that you do, but I imagine one of the things that's always impressed me about rowers is sort of the 4 or 5 a.m., rise out of bed, be down on the water by 6 a.m. sort of thing. What does your day-to-day life look like now as an ex-athlete compared to what it looked like as a high-performance professional world champion athlete?
Well, if we'd been doing this podcast for an after-hours show, there'd be a line of beer bottles beside me now. No, it's an interesting one because it's a whole nother different conversation about what happens after sport. Life after sport is a very, very interesting topic. I was very lucky. I had some great places and some great people I was working with prior and during. So I walked out of the sport, went into business development with a company here in New Zealand, Concept 2, and in our ErgFit company, we do fitness equipment and different bits and pieces and run indoor rowing stuff in New Zealand. So I had a place that I could go to and do bits and pieces. And then at the same time, I worked with a couple of other companies and then still do some public speaking, the Autism New Zealand, and then just generally have a life, trying to get out on the golf course every weekend and playing with my boy, when he's not here or when he's at his mother's house. I get my downtime, and I've been renovating the house. COVID, loved COVID time. Sorry to everyone out there that has shit time. I literally, while everyone ran to the supermarket, I went straight to Mitre 10 and maxed out my credit card and bought paint and timber and supplies and went about remodeling my house. It was just like choice. And of course, there was that sort of 6-7 week period where you weren't really doing a lot. And it was just like every day, right, let's go strip some wallpaper, pull out the paint, get the jib stop out, let's skim coat some rooms. And it was just like, wow. And so, yeah, it's just been awesome to, like, the way that I look at it and I talk to people about it, like, life's this pathway, okay? And we all go down this pathway from the day you're born till the day you die, okay? And you think that it's going to be the straight pathway, cool, this is the way that I'm going. And you've got to navigate, or you make a change and you slip off to the side, okay, we're going to move somewhere else, got a new job, okay, boom. But your pathway's still going forward. And so you just got to navigate all the way along this pathway as you go. And athletes are no different. We're still going to die someday, but at the same time, our pathway was to do our sport, but then we've got to come back in to be part of the society where you've got to work, 9 to 5s, or do what you got to do and have kids, and they go to school and they do everything else. So it just becomes part of life. And you just got to understand, no matter what you do, whether if you go into sports or into the arts, or you go straight into the business world or straight into working, whatever it is, that there's just things that you've got to be doing all the time. And you've got to enjoy that pathway as it goes. But at the same time, it's rocky. There's things you've got to go over and climb under and get through. And sometimes you're stopped. You don't see a way forward. Things might hit the fan, or, relationships break up, or you go broke, or you lose your money, whatever it is. But you just got to keep working on it and just keep deciding where you want to go, what you want to do, where you're going to take it. And, my life now just is no different. Made some changes, work forward. And it's just a simple case, you might step off one side, but it might not go right. Step back into the middle. Okay, get back on track, do what you need to. And that's really the philosophies around what I've tried to do over time. And I've had to find my way through it. And it's been, the rowing stuff seemed to be pretty easy compared to what I'm doing now. Like the last couple of years has been, wow, it is. And I say it to some of the athletes now. I'm like, you guys, like, we had it so easy, right? And like, we didn't quite train at that 5 o'clock in the morning, but we're down at training at 7 o'clock every day, and you do a few sessions and you finish 5, 6 o'clock, whatever it takes, and you do some study in between or whatever else, but you've just got free time, and that's all you're doing. Your bills are going to get paid, because you're getting funding from the government or whatever it is. So the mortgage is getting paid, or the rent's getting paid, and you don't have to worry about it for 12 months, until you get another check or whatever. So it's just like, that's what happens. But then, of course, when you go into the working environment, it's like, man, if you don't start performing, or you get laid off, or there's something going, you know what I mean? It's like, there's a whole nother world that we just don't quite get ready for while you're as an athlete. And I've got to say, I was lucky enough, because I did experience that while I was an amateur before we came professional, that I was working, I was an operations manager, just doing bits and pieces. So I had those skills, whereas now it is a really, really tough situation for a lot of the athletes coming through as to, what do you do? Where do you go? They all get depressed because they don't realize that there's outside of sport, that world just carries on, and it's a lot different than what it is when you're having the time of your life being an athlete and going to the Olympics.
Hey, one of the big news stories, and we'll wrap it up now, so thank you for giving us some time. But one of the big news stories around the Olympics this time round is the whole transgender athletes competing. As a former athlete, as a former Olympiad, what do you think about that whole conversation?
I agree that there is room for trans athletes to compete. I just don't know how. Okay, and like, I know there's protocols in place, because I work in the indoor rowing environment, and I'm on a World Rowing Commission and bits and pieces, and they've got a policy, transgender policy, and it's not an easy one. It's 4 years of hormone treatment and blah blah blah, and all of the stuff that you've got to go through in terms of process to get to that point. So it's not like, hey, I'm going to get operation next year, you're competing with all the women or men or vice versa, whatever. There's a huge process involved in that happening. So I understand that it's a really, really touchy subject, but it's not going away, and so conversations like this are really good to have, because we need to have these conversations, because we need to keep moving forward. probably only 40 years ago, where they were going, oh, why should we let women compete in our sport? Do you know what I mean? Like that's the type of thing that we're at. We're just at a crossroad in our life where, you know, geez, how long ago they're like, no, we don't want women competing in our sport, or we don't want them doing this, or we don't want them as management in the business because they're not as good as men. And you're like, shit, man, we've moved on a long way since then. And I think we're just at a crossroad where there's a lot of stuff like that happening now that we need to talk about now, because in 30 years time, we'll be sitting there going, man, I can't believe they were talking about like that back then. So it's just a natural progression as we go through. And it's a very interesting subject. And I don't know the rights or the wrongs or how it looks, but obviously there's a lot of people in the background making those decisions to make sure that can actually happen, because as I say, not going away, so we have to find out a way to make it inclusive and do what we're doing.
It sounds like what you're saying is, when you use the word conversation, I think about ongoing. I'm not saying that you're saying this, and the reason I said transgender and didn't mention any particular names is that the people who are performing at the Olympics this time around, everyone is following the rules. No one doesn't deserve to be there. No one shouldn't be there, because these are the rules at the moment, and everyone's allowed to follow the rules to compete. That conversation's over. But it sounds like what you're saying when you use the word conversation is it's ongoing. Do you think that we haven't quite got the answer yet? And whilst no one's doing anything wrong, maybe some more nuance needs to come in to find what that answer will be?
Yeah, absolutely, because you don't know what it is and how it looks, because it's never happened before. So that conversation has to happen. You know, at the moment, it might be you have to get your testosterone under a certain level if you're a male coming down to a female. But of course, in years to come, they might be like, you know what, that's too high. Maybe that needs to be even lower. You know what I mean? So there's just different, but we don't have effectively, and it's not the right word to use, but it's the only word to use at the moment. This is an experiment to see if it's right. You know, and then we start moving it on, because the only way to find out whether it's right or wrong is to experiment, right? So that's basically what we're doing now. The conversation is around, are these rules that we're putting in place right now the best rules to have, or do they need to keep adapting over time to figure out what's going to happen and how it looks? So, you know, that's the only thing that you can think of, and it's not going to go away. So this is why the conversation needs to be ongoing. And, you know, what happens in certain sports might not be the same in others. So that's the other side of it as well, is like one rule per all sports or all Olympics isn't going to be the same. It needs to change for different sports, endurance, strength, you know, all the other bits and pieces. And that's really the situation you have, you know, like stand down periods. Maybe 4 years stand down isn't long enough. Maybe it's too long. You know, so how do we know unless we put something out there, we see what happens, and then figure it out from there?
Yeah,
it's a great conversation.
It's an interesting conversation, and I think you're right. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson the other day talking to, I think the guy's name's Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro was very, I don't know, what's going on? This is not fair. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's position was, well, be that the case or not, the question is, it is something that's happening in society today, so it needs to be addressed. So he was kind of coming at it from, there's no point arguing shoulds and shouldn'ts, because it is. And his position was, now that we know that it is, how's the best way to do it? And so I think it's similar to what I hear you're saying. And I hope no one takes offense to and I don't think they will, to the word experiment, but the idea that we're talking about, this is not yet settled yet as to what would be fair. But I think
trial and error.
Yeah. And
probably a better word.
And I think
same thing.
I think you're right. It's like this is what we think is fairest right now. We're going to give this a go. And every sport changes rules, you know. And if this works out to be too heavily weighted one way or the other, then I assume they'll say, so we'll adapt the rules. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right.
Hey, this has been so much fun. Thank you for jumping in and saying you'd have a chat with us. I really appreciated your perspective on a whole bunch of bits and pieces, and just to get to speak to, you know, I don't know if I've had an Olympiad on before. You're number 190 of my podcasts. I don't know if I've had a gold medal winner on. Had some, yeah. So it's been, and not just one. You've got a double hit there, so it's like a double up. Oh, look! Just before we go on that, I was looking up Michael Phelps's record. 23 gold medals, 28 medals, but I think 23 of them are gold. I think 8 of them at one eight gold medals at one Olympics. I mean, superhuman. It's almost unfathomable. We see the joy that someone gets when they get a bronze, rightfully so. This dude's got like 23 golds over, I think it's four Olympics. Just unreal to read those numbers.
Yeah, there's not many sports that, like, swimming is really the only one where you can get it because most of the distances aren't super long, like it's minute races, that type of thing. And if you're technically the best and physically the best, you can do it and you can back it up, and you just train to do minute after minute after minute after minute and get really bloody good at doing it in different shapes and forms. And that's effectively what Michael Phelps was able to do. I think the 200 was about the longest that he did, and what's that, like a minute 40, that type of thing. So amazing specimen to be able to do that. And as I say, nothing else. You can't, in rowing, trying to do twos and an epic mission. The track, say like running, you could possibly do a couple. Maybe the 5,000, 10,000, or the 100, 200.
Yeah, well, Usain Bolt did 9 in a row, didn't he? 3 by 3, 3 over 3 Olympics.
Yeah, and at the same time, to do a lot of them, you've got to have other people involved. So you've got to have relays and bits and pieces. But yeah, absolutely fantastic. And he will be the greatest Olympian because of what he managed to achieve. And there's nothing standing in his way. Will that ever be repeated? I pretty much don't. You'll have to get another swimmer. It's not going to happen in anything else because there's just not enough. Gymnastics possibly. But at the same, you could win all the events. So you could win the team, the individual, and then all the events by yourself. But that's bloody hard to do. You just don't have enough time to train for all of that. But in swimming, obviously, it's only 1 minute, bits and pieces. You can do it, and that's what he managed to achieve. So amazing job. Yeah. I'll take my 2 though. I'm pretty happy.
Hey,
and that's the one thing, I will say, people, and I've got friends, man, that went through the same rowing time that I did and have nothing, 4 Olympics, nothing, and you're just like, wow. And that's the one thing, anyone thinking that the Olympics just looks easy or, we win this, it's easy, it's like, no, man, the time, the effort, the turmoil, the bits and pieces to get to that is just mind blowing in a way, but yeah, it is what it is. And sometimes it's the easiest saying is just, it is what it is. It's just how long it takes, just how it works.
Is there a tiny, tiny part of you that's worried about Hamish coming back and lording that 3rd gold medal over your head?
Oh, no, I want him to come and show me. I love it. Yeah, and that's the thing, he committed to it. He went away, he cycled, and look at it. He won a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games in between. But if you effectively look at it, he left Rio, had really no results for 5 years, and then won when it mattered, and he'll be remembered for having 3 gold medals, and that's just how it went, and an amazing job to him, whatever, he committed to it, put all the guys together, that 8s program, Row New Zealand committed to putting him as part of it. It wasn't Hamish Bond and 7 others. It was the men's 8 with Hamish Bond in the boat.
Yep.
And that's really how it rolled. And so they just managed to get an amazing combination of people going. Same with the women, get all those girls in there, working it together, and you managed to create something that's magical.
I think you should bring the handlebar back. I was just looking at your picture out there. The big, heavy handlebar should come back. But double Olympic medalist, gold medalist, Eric Murray. Thanks so much for joining us today, man. I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you giving up some time.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for letting me come.